Well, hello, everybody. Today, to help us understand the foster care crisis, our guest today is Representative Sheryl Delozier, who serves the 88th District in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. Thank you for being with us.
Certainly.
Her district represents part of Cumberland County, where Nate and I each live, and Upper Allen. And Representative Delozier has been a member of the House since 2009, and she is currently the majority chair of Children and Youth Committee in the House, which is very relevant to our podcast. In addition, she serves on the Consumer Affairs Committee and Rules Committee, and she generously gives her time to the region. I know that from serving with you on the President's Leadership Council and all the things you're involved in. And you just have a lifetime of dedication to protecting the vulnerable, particularly women and children and vulnerable families. And we just want to thank you for not just your time today, but your time in community service. So we are so grateful to have you with us, and we've known each other for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
Is it okay with you if we just dive right in?
Sure, by all means.
So earlier on in this episode, we discussed the numbers related to the foster care crisis, but numbers only tell part of the story.
Sure.
So from where you sit, what are the biggest challenges in our region when it comes to foster care?
Well, I believe that especially in central Pennsylvania and the state as a whole, we very much need to be looking for avenues. You know, our primary focus, obviously, across the board is the safety of children. All of us, I've been doing some regional phone calls with children and youth directors. My fellow chairman and I have put these together primarily to get one-on-one and talking to the folks that literally are boots on the ground and deal with kids that need help every single day. Mm. And in talking to them, their biggest need is to have placements. Their biggest challenge is finding a good placement for a child. And, you know, we have complex cases, certainly, ones that children most likely because of the environment they are growing up in, do have baggage with them. They have mental health issues, possibly. They have maybe drug addictions of their own or any kind of addictions of their own. And many times that's because of the atmosphere in which they're coming from. We cannot control, obviously, households, but what we can try and control and help with is taking those kids out of a dangerous situation and moving them into a safe situation, and one that they feel valued. Many times they've kind of felt like the extra chair in the room for, you know, something you don't really have to pay attention to and is just there. The ability for us to recognize that that's not what a child needs. A child needs someone to nurture them, to encourage them, to, God forbid, just pick them up on time, you know, which a lot of times these kids have not had. So the directors in and of themselves are looking for folks and families to be foster families, to be placement for maybe even a short time, and be able to be called when there's an emergency. This was no bigger of a challenge during COVID. If a child was in a congregate care setting where there was more than one child, it wasn't a family. And our federal Family First law is going into place. The state of Pennsylvania has filed their plan for approval from the federal government. October was the deadline to do so. But we're trying to get away from congregate care. And we are trying to find families for the children to be placed into. Kinship being the primary. Anybody who has a family link, I think, is definitely the primary. But those are challenges because finding, when you can't find a kinship care, finding Mr. and Mrs. Smith in the same community that's willing to open their doors for a child. And having those placement families, that is the biggest challenge that these directors really, really face for the children. The emergency settings, the emergency need, something has come up. And then you add on COVID, a child testing positive for COVID or having been near someone who was in COVID. Obviously, that cuts down even more where that child could possibly go. A lot of the private services won't take the child at that point because of the testing of positive. So that just adds much more stress to an already stressed situation. So placement, I think, is definitely the primary hurdle, but also the primary goal for our folks that work in children and youth in all of our 67 counties. So.
That's really helpful. Can you speak more to helping our listeners understand about what is your role in local foster care or even just statewide foster care? Like, what do you do as the chair of children and youth? That's, that's one question.
Well,
and then particularly, what is kind of the conversation
Sure.
in the local political sphere looking like? Like, what are you discussing and working on so we can understand what you all are doing?
Sure. The ability for us as the committee within the House, obviously the same, very similar type of actions happen over in the Senate as well. So that's two separate bodies focusing on the needs of our children and our youngest residents that are here in Pennsylvania. But the ability for us to recognize, and that was part of our conversations actually that we were having with these regional phone calls. And I call them phone calls primarily because we were able to have Zoom. So we use Zoom for a positive there.
Everyone's using Zoom.
Exactly. So we beamed everybody in to have the conversation. And it was great because the ability for folks to be back in their office and but still have the conversation, all good. So we'll use technology for a positive. So, but for the House Children and Youth Committee, our role is, I think, to ask the folks that do it on a day-to-day basis, what is it that's preventing you from doing your best job? What is your frustration in doing what you need to do for these children? They see the children every day. They see the pain that these kids, whether it just be heartache or physical pain that they're going through, dealing with abuse situations, dealing with mental health situations, that they're someone that they live with or is in a crisis of sorts. And everyone's different. Every single situation is different. There is no cookie cutter child abuse, child neglect, child need out there. Every person has come from a different situation. So as the committee, we only have a very small part because we only deal with the regulations, the laws that are supposed to try and protect the child. Certainly the children and youth directors in the counties who are licensed by the state, are overseen by the state, but the children and youth directors in each of the counties are where the real work happens. They're the ones that, like I said, see the child, come in crisis and find a solution. What we try to do is pave the way for them to have the resources financially, both federal and state, but also just the discretion, which was an issue that came up in both the phone calls we've had thus far, and we have another one tomorrow with a different region. But their frustration is that they don't have discretion sometimes, and they're required to have a 3-month hearing in front of a judge. Well, some cases don't need the 3-month hearing, but yet they're required to be there in front of the judge so the judge can have a touch point of that child and the person that they are living with or their parent, whatever the situation may be. And the directors were frustrated because they do know. They know the situation the best because they've seen all the facts. They know the child. They've had interaction with the child. The caseworker is while having a very heavy load of many, many cases, is the one that's responsible for making a relationship with that child, making sure that child is safe. So that person is probably the best person to be able to say whether that child needs to go see a judge, needs to be hauled in for another interview, or the parent hauled in for a stack of papers to sign off on. That was another frustration that we have heard is just the red tape. Government's well known for it. But the ability, yeah. Well, we compared it to them, the amount of paperwork and everything else that a family or a host or a foster parent or whatever, it's like buying a house. You feel like you're you feel like you're signing your life away. And that was a frustration. That was like, why do we have to do all this paperwork when you're trying to get to know this child or this family? And they said it's very awkward when you go in to meet a family to say, So why do you want to do this? Why do you think that this little boy would be good for your family? What you want to get to know that person. You don't want to be signing 400 pages of paper and feeling like you just bought an entire 60-acre plot of land. You're talking about a child, and the paper is a very, very large stumbling block in many, many regards. So there's a lot of different things that we can try and streamline at the state government side of it. But hearing from those that do it, they're the ones that can point targetedly to. And now some are federally mandated. We're not going to have a lot of authority over
money,
that.
Then you got to do it.
Right. And then that was the strings are attached. So if you want this grant to subsidize this family, so that to provide for this child, the strings that are attached. And one of the issues that did come up there as well were some of the hurdles that they find. If a family has someone with a criminal background. That's something in their history. Might have been 20 years ago. But with some of the grant money, you can't have any hiccups. And last I checked, no one's perfect.
That's right.
Right? So everyone deserves that second chance. And that's been something that I've advocated for time and time again in our criminal justice system, which is a whole other issue. But
we'll have to have you back about that.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. But we have to be... We need to recognize that no one's perfect. And so they have a charge from 20 years ago that's a nonviolent, misdemeanor, but to some federal dollars that prohibits them from being a great placement for a kinship, especially like an aunt or an uncle or so. So there's a lot of different hurdles. And so we try to, at the state, with the legislative side, we're trying to listen to find out where we can pave some way to less feel like you're buying a house and more like you're just saying, yes, I'm willing to open my heart and my house to this child. So I think it'll be a pretty big conversation that we'll have. And I think it'll be a long one because nothing in bureaucracy changes quickly. So.
Yeah, and we still want it to be a process discerning what is a safe home. And
Correct.
I think you would agree with that.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Finding the middle ground there.
Yeah, and we often say to the families that go through foster care considering the application, they're overwhelmed by the paperwork. and it is true, so just affirm that, but also we try to put the positive spin on it and say, if you're overwhelmed by this and you're already thinking about getting out, you're about to invite trauma into your home. And so
True.
How do we walk alongside them with the paperwork and also begin coaching them and prepping them for the work that they have to do and exposing them to the resources that will be there with them? Like, we're not just saying do this and then not be with them for the long haul. So engaging with them on the paperwork
having that support is great.
Yeah, it helps them see that support and even receive that support. Yeah. Where many of us take on challenges and we brought this upon ourselves. Why could we ever ask for that? So we actually try to jump in early in the paperwork and walk alongside them as a church. And then that way, when they are in it, they're more likely to
that's great.
To receive support.
I'm sure they need.
I need that.
Yeah. In respite care, in all honesty, when someone has taken a child and been a placement, whether it's a relative or not, sometimes you're pulling your hair out and you need to get out. Get out of town or whatever.
Just like normal parents.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so having the church, having folks that are willing to step in for a weekend, for overnight, whatever the need is. I know that there's a lot of kind-hearted souls out there in churches and in different organizations that provide that respite care sometimes. And that's also very heavily used with a child with disabilities and a parent that has, it might be their own biological child. It's not a matter of they're fostering or that they've adopted. But the bottom line is still, we all know we kind of pull our hair out sometime with kids, whatever the relation.
Right. That's right. That's great. Yep. Thank you for that.
Yeah. It takes a village, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is more of a personal question for you. But what are you most passionate about in foster care? You mentioned some of the ideas of just finding a safe home for kids. Where did that passion come from, and what are those passions?
I think first and foremost, the job that I do on a regular basis is political. It's little P, big P. If it's an election year, it's big P. If it's not an election year, it's little P. Kind of thing. There's always politics in governmental entities, in getting elected, in many things. That atmosphere in and of itself is not as civil as it used to be, and I say that and to entwine with children because. I think one thing that we can all agree on, and not be vicious or nasty or whatever, is the fact that we all want and never want to see a child hurt. And if you don't agree with that, then you probably will be at one of our Camp Hill or SCIs at one point in your life, because that means you just don't, that empathy for a child. I don't know any soul that could not empathize with the fact that a child should not be treated. Yeah. And anyone who thinks that it's okay, I think there's a real problem with that. So Republican, Democrat, rural, urban, black, white, whatever divides us. I think that the ability for us to recognize that keeping a child safe can join us, because I think we can all get behind that. Yeah. How we go about it, certainly, it comes back into the role of public policy. Sure. And everybody has their own opinion how that should work, and that's fine. That's why we're in this country and we can debate civilly. But the ability for us to turn that around and recognize that a child is a child. They didn't ask to be born into a certain family. They didn't ask to be born into a certain household or a certain location. They are born and therefore should be cared for. And those of us that are in government, it's we're supposed to stand for those that can't stand for themselves. A child can't stand for themselves in most cases. I mean, they certainly have a voice, and they should have a voice. But if they're growing up in an atmosphere where they're being abused, to them, that's the only thing they've ever known. And it just can break your heart to think that a child thinks that's okay. And so bringing them out into a stable environment, one that you're not okay to hit someone, you're not okay to verbally abuse someone, is I think all of our roles. Yep, so absolutely. Yes, I get a little passionate about the fact that no child should be hurt. And as my husband will say, he jokes that he goes, well, I thought politicians were just supposed to kiss the babies, not take them. So when I see a little one, I'm like, give me that baby. So I just, they can't, again, speak for themselves. So we have to. And to me, that's a very, very important role. So.
Well, yeah, we fully agree with you, and we think that's actually one of the rallying cries of why we think a regional foster care response is not only possible but likely, because there's a lot of challenges. We've been saying that there's a lot of challenges in this world that have no solutions, but protecting vulnerable kids shouldn't be one of them. Like, we've got to do better, and we've got to realize that this is happening and figure out what we can do. And because these kids go somewhere, right? They don't just disappear if we're too busy or it's too hard. Like, these kids go somewhere, and you and the bodies that you and your team and the House members and Senate oversee, like, they have to make these difficult decisions of, like, where did these kids go? Because our inaction is an action. Like, we're choosing to dictate a future for these kids that is less than it could be if we don't engage in these issues. So we agree that it's hard, and now what? Like, so how do we deal with that reality?
Yeah, one of the directors just today said they feel like they're drinking by a fire hose because their front door never stops opening.
That's right.
And so some of the social services do stop at times, but they themselves, as children and youth directors within our counties, their door is constantly revolving.
That's right.
And they have a set timeline. In 48 hours, they have to be with that child. If there's a report to Childline, if there's a report to their office, if there's whatever the situation may be, they're on a time schedule, and those caseworkers have to do it by the book, and that's one of the issues of licensure and everything else that comes out as well is just that issue that they want to do it right. It's not like they ever want to do it wrong, but their frustration is if they get a piece of paper signed after 3 days rather than 2 days. Is that really a mountain to die on, kind of thing? Is that really that important that the piece of paper didn't get signed until the next day when the child was placed appropriately? Right. But that's where the families can help. That's where our community can help, because, if in Cumberland County right now, it's 200 kids are in foster care. Right. So our Cumberland County needs, wouldn't it be great if Cumberland County had 250 homes that were approved, that were ready to go? Because if this little child comes in, maybe with some issues, maybe just unfortunately something happened, maybe there was an accident, maybe that, whatever the situation may be, they cannot be with their family. But to have options, to have racial options, to have social options, in the sense that church and beliefs, and if it's a child that may be of Jewish faith, they want to find a family that's Jewish, to be able to align that child maybe, and that's not always a litmus test. Certainly, I'm just using that as an example, but it's just the ability to have options for the children and youth directors to say, well, we have a couple extra families that, this little person can match best with family B, but the next little person, family F is fantastic, would be a perfect match. But having that amount of families extra is not always their ability to have.
I love that you use that example of 200 kids in foster care in Cumberland County. And we'd love to have 250 waiting families, because just recently I was talking to a children and youth employee locally in a local county, and they were sharing with me that they had 50 kids in the last month that they couldn't find placement for because the need was so great. And so we regularly say to people, we'd rather you go through the process and then have nothing to do.
Oh, right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Than the opposite of having kids who have to be sent out of the region or out of the state because there's nowhere safe for them to be. So that's where this idea of more than enough, like we want to share this idea that we want to have more than enough kids, because even the reality of like having one kid one adult in your life who's investing in you, that's awesome. Yeah. But all of us have had dozens, like anywhere we are, like we're like Cliff used to say, like if you ever find a turtle on top of a log, like you realize that someone placed them there. Like, and I think like a lot of us, they didn't get there that way. Like, so anything that I'm able to do, or the perspective I'm able to have, or the contribution I'm able to make, or because lots of people have contributed to me being where I am.
Right.
In the same way, I think that what you're speaking to is so powerful and compelling that, we just really appreciate your work on that.
No, no problem. Yeah. Glad to. That's part of what we're doing. And it's one thing, like I said, we've had a lot of different issues with everything with last year. And I said this to you guys before. It was like, Children and Youth Committee is pretty much, pretty even keel. We never want that headline, obviously, of a child in danger or worse, which unfortunately we've had some. But the ability for us to recognize that children and youth could kind of go along, make sure, work on abuse, limiting, obviously, the abuse, finding foster care, finding, those types of things. But with everything that's happened in 2020, with the schools not being in session, and the biggest reporters of child abuse not having access to children, being the teachers, being our school personnel, who have to be so many things to so many people with the environment that we are in right now. Some days they're the priest, some days they're the guidance counselor, some days they're just the teacher, God forbid. Some days they're the mom. Some days they're their dad. Whatever, they have to be so many things to so many little people, and we have recognized the mental health impact that last year had. On a lot of kids. Unfortunately, we had a very high number of suicides. And it's just a matter of having that outlet, having to know that they can go and talk to somebody. We've had a number of hearings. I've had 5 hearings this year on different issues, but 2 of which were on with the Education Committee on mental health. It is just an overflowing, unfortunately, conversation that our kids need to know they have some place to go, need to know that they can reach out without being ridiculed, that they have a safe place to go. And our professionals that are in our schools do a fantastic job as much as they possibly can. And our hearings were really to kind of pull out what weren't they getting, what do they need more, kind of back to what we did with just foster care. It was the same question that we were asking with mental health. What is it what hurdles are you having just to get a child to therapy. And those are children that may very well have supportive families, but they themselves are dealing with something, maybe even a loss. Maybe, we have the Caring Place, the Highmark Caring Place that I'm on that board over in Lemoyne that deals with, a child dealing with death. That can send somebody into a quite a tailspin and dealing with that with somebody that they loved. And that's with the nurturing family that they cared about, kind of thing. So can you imagine what a child being taken out of what they know? Whether it was a bad situation or not, it's still what they knew.
Yeah, sure.
And they had a certain comfort level. Change is hard. Yeah. Even though the other situation may have been bad, it was what they knew. Yeah. And putting them into a new situation, give a kid a break. The kid's got to adapt. And that sometimes that's kind of hard to do.
Yeah, that's
quickly, especially because sometimes it's really a quick process. You're here one day and you're here someplace else. That's hard for a kid to wrap their arms around sometimes.
Yeah. We just recently had 2 kids in our home and 3 in one, and it's always just eye opening to us of just, wow, like I can't imagine being in one place and now being in our house.
Right.
And, especially at bedtime and just the routines and the normalcy and the smells.
They may never have had a routine.
The sounds,
the routine.
Yeah,
you go to bed at 9 o'clock. What do you mean I go to bed at 9 o'clock? I don't go to bed at 9 o'clock.
Right.
I go to bed at
all
1 o'clock.
All of the rhythms are different.
Right.
All of the smells, the sounds, some
personalities.
Some of the kids we've had don't sleep well because they're used to noise and we live in the suburbs. Like you just never know. Like it's all the sensory change and it's really hard for a kid to process. So
they adapt, but
they do, and they're super adaptable. Yeah. And we know that the challenges facing foster care are numerous, and we know it's hard, and you see that in your seat. But as you think about what do you wish people in the community knew about the local foster care crisis, what would you say? And particularly, if I can, I just love your encouragement to families. Like, what do you wish they knew in terms of the hope and the positive impact they can have? Because the narrative is out there about how hard it is. And it is hard.
It is hard.
Denying it's hard.
Kids are hard.
But kids are hard, period.
Yep.
Like,
what
do you wish?
They have their own opinions and they're not allowed. Who allowed them to have their own opinions?
I don't know. I'm asking my kids this. They have them.
They do.
They change, actually. Which is,
I'm hoping.
That's ridiculous. So, but I do wonder if you could speak to just what do you wish people knew in terms of the positive aspects of the foster care crisis and the difference that people can make.
Well, I think the difference that people can make. I mean, think about there's many organizations out there. We talk about foster care, certainly. Yep. Foster care is hard. You are taking a little person into you, and it might not be a little person, it might be an older child, which are even harder to place. Everybody wants, we were joking earlier about give me that baby. Everybody wants the baby. Everybody wants the small child.
Sibling
exactly.
Because
really they've had more time to be hurt.
Yep.
And that hurt comes out in many different forms.
That's right.
Acting out and having the patience to deal with that is hard. It takes empathy. It takes patience. It takes the man upstairs giving you lots of strength. But you wouldn't be doing it if you didn't have it already in you, is my opinion, kind of thing. But you don't have to go the full route of foster care. You don't have to go the full route of adopting another child. There's organizations around that allow you to be such an influence on a child. Big brothers, big sisters, becoming a mentor. Once a week, meet with a child, help them with homework. I heard and I actually, I've been crazy a little bit, but I heard this advertisement on the radio the other day about because of 20. And it was basically because of kids getting behind last year, that they needed folks to tutor. I'm like, I can tutor. I can do that. Don't test me in 11th and 12th grade or something, on English phraseology or something like that.
My 6th grader makes me nervous. I do not understand.
But I could figure it out. But so those organizations or entities allow for you to have something that adapts to your schedule. If you are not prepared to adopt a child, or maybe you've raised your children and you're an older individual and you don't want a 6-year-old running around your house. Okay, that's fine. Hopefully there'll be other parents that can have that 6-year-old, but you can take that 6-year-old to the zoo. You can take that 14-year-old to the Senators game. You can take a little girl over to the Capitol Mall and get a manicure just for the fun of it, because she's probably never had that. Had that relaxing, just the ability to say, take a breath. Enjoy. That's right. Feel pretty. You're special. Something as silly as that. Something as little as that. That's great. Take them to a movie. Something just because it shows that there are adults that don't hit. There are adults that don't yell at you. There are adults that care. There are adults that recognize that as a 12-year-old, you should go to a PG movie and not a rated R XXX movie, because there are limits. There are boundaries. There are schedules. There are things that you should do that is something that's good for you. So it's someone who cares. So there are so many avenues out there that many of us can be a participant in, while not inviting that. If you don't have that capability for whatever reason, that's fine. I mean, that's not a bad thing. But if you have a couple hours, be a mentor. Like I said, it's not a lot. It's a lot of times it's just companionship. Yeah. You don't have to be teaching them, the world's problems and all the solutions if we had them. When you sit down with this child, you're having a conversation with them. Mm-hmm. You're sitting there and talking to some of the directors and everything else. They've said that the impact you can have on a child with only a couple hours. But the big issue is not the amount of time necessary. Well, a lot of time is precious. Right. But it's the amount of consistency. Right. Yeah, it's that when you say you're going to pick that child up at Friday at 4 so that you can go get dinner and go see a movie, that you're there at 3:55. So that child knows that Sheryl is going to be there on time. Right. Because I'm important. I matter. Right. Yeah. When she says that she's going to be there and commit to me, that they just don't blow me off. That they just don't say, oh, I'll get back to that little person. Showing that they're important. Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of avenues to do that, a lot more than people would probably realize. And I know you have a lot of guests coming on that you're going to be talking about on different podcasts and everything that are much better versed in that avenue, just in our community of options. But there are many of them, many entities, many groups that can fill that need to say, hey, Big Brothers Big Sisters is the one that popped into my brain the most, just because it's one that's known. It's a known entity. Yeah. But I do the bowling event with the Big Brothers Big Sisters. They always beat me, those little runts. I'm terrible.
My 5-year-old beat me recently.
Exactly. I'm terrible.
I mean, he used bumpers or no bumpers?
Yes, that's what I was going to say, with the gutter guards and everything. Come on.
My son uses bumpers, and then he holds it over his head that he never got like a 0. And it's like,
well, okay. All right, you got to give him that.
How dare you throw it in the gutter?
I know. Well, I just laugh at the kids. The kids are they get so giddy. They're very funny. But yeah, so that's just one entity that everybody would know the name of. But
that's great.
Well, there's avenues.
Yeah, we really appreciate that. And just in listening to you talk, and prepping for you, and just looking through your notes in our previous conversations, there's this guy that I've heard from and learned from called Josh Shipp. If people who are listening want to check him out, Josh Shipp with 2 P's, joshshipp.com. And he has this great quote that he grew up in the foster care system and does training and helping communities around the country respond to foster care. And he said, every kid is one caring adult away from being a success story. Every kid is one caring adult away from being a success story. So when we think about this idea of possible and likely, that it's possible and likely that this kid will continue in the trajectory that they are in if we don't intervene, right? Which is the whole genesis of the foster care system. Like, we've got to do something. Like, yes, children should belong in families ideally, but sometimes they're not safe. Where they are, let's keep them together and let's work hard to do that. But in the absence of family and a safe biological environment or a kinship arrangement that is the ideal, in the absence of that, what can the rest of us do? Or even in addition to that, because none of us were made by just one person, but one person can have a profound difference in the trajectory of a life. So we are just so thankful. We know that you've got a lot of ways to spend your time. We're so grateful that you chose to spend it with us. And I just want to say that we want to try for each of our guests, including you, to just take a minute and just share the main takeaway that we took among the many things that we can learn from. And we'll be learning and listening to this over and over again. But one of the things for me, and then I'll let Nate go, is oftentimes we think about our state government or elected officials in this amorphous body that's easy to yell at. I was a politics major at Messiah, and I remember one poll that said 17 Congress had like a 17% popularity rate, but 90-something% of incumbents were reelected. Right. So like we hate Congress, but our guy or gal, like I couldn't do more for them. And so it's just so funny. But that your conversation with us today, one thing I'm taking away is that you remind us that these are people, you and others, your colleagues, who are working every day to discourse and hopefully civilly to figure out what is the best way forward for us as a Commonwealth to say, the past is the past, but our past will not define our future. Like we've got to figure out how to protect kids. And even though it's a chaotic system, like it's not this amorphous thing, these are real people living real lives, working hard every day. And we're not always pleased with the outcome, but you're yearning.
We're not pleased with the outcome.
Totally. You're yearning though. You're all these committees that you were telling us about and all these things you're doing, like you're yearning for the not yet and you're not satisfied with the status quo is just a great encouragement and a reminder to me and to us to keep remembering to pray for you and do all that we can to join you in responding to the challenges that these kids and teenagers are facing in our region, because someone's going to find them and someone's going to define their future, and it might as well be us. So that's my takeaway. How about you, Nate?
Great.
Yeah, I think before a specific wording you used, I was just really encouraged by your passion for children and just how you were getting, even a little emotional there because your passion is so strong for their safety, and you just deeply care about them being invested in. And so as somebody who lives in one of your districts, that really is impactful to me, and I'm sure to whoever hears this podcast. But I think one of the things that you kind of alluded to in your when you were discussing that last question, but that you mentioned also in our pre-production call, was just the idea that people are in their tunnel vision, and they're just so focused on their own lives. They're so focused on, we all have things going on. We all have things that we're anxious about and all that. But that in order to really attack this problem, we have to step outside of that. And that's where the empathy piece comes in. And we have to remove the blinders that have been in front of us. And we have to, just see the reality of things and see where kids are in need and where we can help. And so then you taking that was from before our interview, but then during the interview talking about just the value of each child and how whatever our people who want to get involved have to offer, that is valuable. And whatever that is, as long as it is consistent and as long as it is for the purpose of caring for that child, it's deeply important. Yeah. So thank you for that. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And do you have any closing thoughts, anything that you would love to leave our listeners with as we close out? I
think the only thing that I would add, in all honesty, with tunnel vision and with that idea is simply the fact that there's a lot of, not too long ago, something happened and you know how they say you restore the faith of humankind, and you see an action or you see a kindness, and it restores your faith. And it restores the fact that you, on our 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock news, all we hear about is people doing the wrong thing a lot of times, people harming someone else, the latest murder or the shooting or the whatever subject matter is there, none of which usually is good. I always say when I go to Eagle Scouts, those should be the headlines, the Eagle Scouts, rather than the kids doing the wrong. But unfortunately, that doesn't sell. So that tunnel vision and everything else, there's so much kindness in people out there. And I have real faith that I know it's out there. I know that people have hearts for themselves, for their own families, certainly. I understand that priority. I have 2 children. I would would do anything for them. But everybody has a little extra in there, and it doesn't take a lot to use that little extra space to be able to say, hey, I could help some other little person that you may never have known, you know? So it's just a matter of the kindness of people in Cumberland County and our state. You see it many, many times over when you're not really looking for it. And so I would say to those that are listening or those that are out there is take a step back out of that tunnel vision of what you have to do before dinner, because I know we're all there. We all do that, or what I got to do before the weekend, or what I got to, kind of thing. But take that step back and just say, do I have an extra hour, an extra half a day, Sunday afternoons, instead of watching the football game. Sorry. Because I'm a
you don't have to watch all of them.
I'm a baseball addict, so I that would be very painful for me. No, but can we carve out a little time? Yeah. And I think the answer for most people would be that when they see the result, when they see the fact and if they understand the impact those couple hours could have on a younger soul, that it would, I think that would kind of rev some folks up and get things going. So I appreciate the podcast, because I think what you're trying to do is fantastic. And I applaud you for taking the time out of your schedules to sit people down and say, hey, lay the groundwork so you can educate folks and say, hey, look, a couple hours can really make a huge difference. And unfortunately, what I do is, as they say, sometimes like making sausage takes forever. But something like this could have a quicker, much more impactful result in generating some folks that are willing to give Cumberland County's children and youth a call, and get hooked up, filling out that paperwork, and willing to do that. So I applaud you guys for doing it, and my little bit of insight is gladly given. And I look forward to hearing the different folks that you have lined up, because it sounds like you're going to hit all the bases on it and do a great job.
Thank you again so much, Representative Delozier. Sure. We're so grateful. And as we consider our region's foster care crisis before, during, and after, and what we can do to respond, our next episode is going to focus on before. What are the things we can do before foster care to step in? Because together we can make a difference for certainly our region, but more specifically, as we talked about today, for children and teenagers and families. And we just really appreciate you listening and look forward to continued conversations in the days to come. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.